Hello everyone, this is Tyler here coming from Estonia. Many people have a lot of questions about how to know which factors to look for when buying biotechnology stocks, as there's so many moving parts going on and it's so difficult knowing how to decipher from all these sources of information and whatnot. And it's really critical that you understand everything here so that you can make big gains, and more importantly that you don't lose a lot of money from bad buy-ins. So this information here could be relevant for both day traders, swing traders, and long-term investors. But it would mostly be relevant for both day traders and swing traders, apart from people that are purchasing stocks of major pharmaceutical companies. But it's relevant for anyone here who wants to learn something. So, um, as everyone knows, new drugs that are released can create huge gains for these pharmaceutical companies. Companies that started with 5 or 10 employees can release drugs that become multi-billion-dollar drugs and make these companies mainstream. In fact, many of the major pharmaceutical companies that we know today were indeed started this way, and this is how many of them began. So the first thing is checking if the company is out of the clinical stage, because clinical stage is very critical in understanding what this means, because the biotech industry, most of the smaller companies are still in clinical stage, which means that they may not have a single drug that's made it to the market, and it makes their stocks very volatile and very risky, because companies that have already released drugs and are working on other ones have more to show, whereas these ones don't have anything to show. So it's very easy for their stock to greatly fluctuate, and due to the fact they probably don't have a great source of solid funds coming in. So be very mindful of that, and always check on all the information and the data and everything. Now, the second thing is, remember that commercial stage companies are still risky. People often think that because a company's produced a great product and they've already made a couple $1 billion in sales, that this makes them essentially bulletproof. But this is not the case. We can look at companies such as Vertex Pharmaceutical, which had a $400 million profit in its last quarter, and they still had a net loss of 41 million, which did take a hit on its stock. And the state of their company is fortunately better off than other ones, but it's not to say that companies at this stage could also be risky, and you could still see great fluctuations with these kind of these stocks. Third thing is, when buying biotech stocks, check your risk tolerance, because many people that are in their 20s, like my age, can take on a lot more risk than people in their 50s who cannot afford to take massive losses, and who can't afford to have big hits to their retirement accounts. And also, sometimes older people are more reliant on these funds earlier than people my age, so they can't wait for a company to have a overall positive trend for 10 years. We'll say they may need those funds within 5 years. So it's very important, and there are some great companies out there like Johnson and Johnson or Amgen, Gilead Biosciences. These are very solid long-term players that are probably going to be here for the next 50 or 100 years, and you could probably buy into these ones, and they also offer the benefit of dividends, and they're just very solid long-term growth stocks to hold in your portfolio. The next thing is check whether your biotech stock has all its eggs in one basket. And what I mean by that is that um, drug development expenses rises exponentially as it gets closer to the FDA approval. If companies don't have their everything sorted out, they can they can have big issues. And an example, this was Puma Pharmaceutical or Puma Biotechnology, which is entirely devoted to a treatment of certain kinds of breast cancer. And over the past few years, the markets became less optimistic towards this drug, and likewise, their drug actually a few years ago, within 1 year, it went down over 95%. So it's this type of thing is actually fairly common within the biotechnology sector. Now the next thing is check for interest from bigger players, because that can be a huge way for these smaller companies to get their drugs out there. We'll take Ionis Biopharma. They were in they discovered some new drug candidates internally, and how they were able to make profit was they moved drugs through larger pharmaceutical companies, and essentially they built up revenue that way. And this is how some smaller players work, and they can build enough capital to then fund in-house drugs. And if there's a lot of interest coming internally from big players like Johnson and Johnson or Gilead, it's also more certain that these are very viable drugs to be released on the market. And so these types of companies are probably more sound to invest in. The next thing is avoiding clinical stage biotechs with big pipelines and no partners. Now, as we've seen, there's companies that like to put they do more focus on the science of the pharmaceutical rather than on the whole pipeline, and ensuring that they're able to put out drugs. And that's a huge problem, because this industry is funded by profits, by large interest in the drug, and that it will make it to the marketplace. And if these companies are unable to do that, it's more than likely that this type of company won't be around in 10 or in 20 years. And there's a well-known company known as Anavex Life Sciences, and this company, this was an issue they had, and it's they have a great Alzheimer drug in their pipeline, but they have so many drugs in their pipeline that they haven't really spent a lot of resources more focusing on actually getting these drugs to the last stage, and that's a big issue. Now, the next thing is checking the ratio of upfront cash to biobucks. And biobucks is industry jargon for potential payouts if these drugs pass regulatory and commission milestones. And many biotech stock companies will announce these big billion-dollar deals, and this can just be a lot of PR hype. What I mean by that is that there's companies that they receive funds from a major player like Johnson and Johnson, but more of the funding they receive is based on if they can reach milestones. So you have to look at it. Take a company like Celgene. They were working with Juno Therapeutics, and Juno Therapeutics received $150 million up front for a major drug they were working on, plus 10% equity stake in this drug. That's a pretty sure sign that Celgene really believes in what they're doing. Now, if they had just received $10 million up front with the equity stake, that's a very small amount for a major pharmaceutical company. So it would show maybe not a lot of confidence on the front end, and that's something to kind of be aware of. The next thing is check the ratio of press releases to clinical trials, which kind of ties back to the first thing. Like, PR is a way of hyping things and just totally blowing up the hype of a company or drug. And always check FDA website, check other first-hand sources to see if those PR releases are parallel to the clinical trials that are articles that are being published. And the next thing is check the press releases against the clinicaltrials.gov website. There's a great government website here where you can see what the status of these drugs are and see what stage of the process and if they've been approved. And this is what this entails. I do this quite frequently. It's a great way to get first-hand information and see if there's consistency. Now, the next thing is, if you see control groups in early stage trials, this is really critical, and it can be very significant for the success of these pharmaceutical companies, because in phase 1 and phase 2 trials, there's often not requirement to have a control group. So if they do initiate control group, this takes a lot more time and resources. It likely means that this company is very confident in the outcome of this drug, and it would definitely be a green light that this company has some great products to be released. Now, the next thing is checking for statistical significance, and that's this is a more quantitative metric here. And so I won't go too deep into this. I'll create another video for this, but it's looking at what the p-value is. And p-value is, in summary, it's figuring out the context of efficiency results. And this basically means how accurate are the results from a quantitative scale. And this ties into one of the other points that was made, but just look at quantitative metrics and look for consistency. Now, the next thing is, remember, FDA meetings and letters are not subject to full disclosure, and this can be very important because PR, as stated earlier, can really hype something or take things out of context, which can greatly adjust the price of the stock for that day and many days to come. So always be aware of that. And the last thing is checking for pooled data analysts, and that's just getting a full context of the data that's out there and looking for consistency in summary. So hopefully you guys learned something new here, and please give me your feedback on this video. Thank you.